My name is Caroline Holt, and I'm 44 years old. From the outside, you would have said I made it. I had a serious job in cybersecurity for a big tech firm that handled more sensitive data than I like to think about. Not glamorous, not movie-level classified, just the sort of networks and architecture that, if they went down or got stolen, would ruin a lot of very powerful people's quarters. I had a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with a maple tree in the front yard and a kitchen that I'd remodeled exactly the way I wanted it. White cabinets, butcher block countertops, the works. I had a retired canine named Shep, who snored like an old man and followed me from room to room as if he'd been assigned to me. And I had a husband. His name was Nikolai, 38, charming in that photogenic, curated sort of way that makes people assume his life is perfect because his social media looks like a travel magazine. Perfectly undone hair, tailor-made jackets, that half smile that says, "Relax. I've got this, even when you don't know what this is." If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said I was building a life with someone who wanted the same thing. Now I know I was building a life around someone who was building something else entirely. Nikolai was, or so he claimed, a geopolitical risk consultant. It was one of those vague jobs that sound impressive and impossible to verify. Lots of travel, expensive dinners, with clients, late-night calls full of pauses and laughter and jargon I didn't understand. He always had a plausible, sophisticated answer. Sanctions briefing. Energy market volatility. Political turbulence in Eastern Europe, babe. Nothing you need to worry about. He spoke 3 languages, English, French, and enough Russian to get by. But it's rusty, he used to say with a little shrug that felt rehearsed. He was the one who insisted on the prenup. That was the part I still chewed on at 3 in the morning, months later. I had my house, my 401k, and a comfortable savings account. He had significant family assets overseas and a portfolio that never seemed to exist in any paperwork I actually saw. "Look, Carrie," he'd said back then, using the nickname he knew I was soft about. "My family is complicated. Old money, ugly money. I just want to protect you from all of that. You keep what's yours, I keep what's mine. Clean, simple." He framed it as if he were protecting me. I work in cybersecurity. I understand risk. It made sense. I agreed. We both signed. His lawyer drafted it, tight language, cold as steel. For almost 10 years, our life was comfortable. Not perfect. No one's is. We had arguments about dishes and in-laws and how often he traveled. But we had routines. Sunday morning coffee, movie nights, Shep's walks after dinner. If you'd looked at a snapshot of us, you would have seen a believable, vaguely aspirational marriage. Then, about 6 months ago, something shifted. It started small. His new laptop, a sleek black thing he guarded like a limb. He'd always been careful with devices. We both worked around sensitive information. But this was different. He stopped leaving it in the living room. It was always in the home office, door closed. He changed his phone password and tilted the screen away when he typed it. He took calls at odd hours, voice low, sometimes switching to a language I couldn't quite catch before closing the door. I noticed. Of course I did. I notice when someone mistypes a password 3 times. I notice when a server is half a second slower. I notice everything. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, occupational hazard. Then I told myself the classic story. He's cheating. The thought made my stomach twist. Somehow, cheating felt easier to believe than any alternative. Ordinary, human, ugly, but familiar. The late-night trips, the sudden working dinners, the way he came home smelling like hotel soap and someone else's perfume he said was from the car service air freshener. Sure, okay. It ate at me. One night, after he'd flown out for a 3-day conference in Geneva, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Shep's heavy breathing, the only sound in the room. My chest felt tight, like my body was warning me about something my brain refused to name. I did something I'm not proud of. I bought a nanny cam, a high-end one, the kind that looks like a USB wall charger. Motion detection, night vision, remote access from an app on my phone. It was the sort of thing I'd seen clients talk about in internal security briefings with a kind of embarrassed shrug. "Yeah, my wife caught me with one of those." Or, "My husband installed one after our break-in." I justified it the same way. "I just want to know," I told myself, fingers trembling slightly as I unboxed it at the kitchen table. "If he's cheating, I'll know. If he's not, then I'm the crazy one, and I'll deal with that." I plugged it into the outlet by the bookshelf in our home office. The angle was perfect. Desk, chair, laptop, most of the room. No one ever suspects the charger. I went to bed with my phone face down and my heart pounding like I'd just broken into my own life. The first alert came 2 days later. It was mid-afternoon. I was at my desk at work, going through a mind-numbing audit trail. My phone buzzed. Motion detected in office, live view. My mouth went dry. I tapped the notification. The feed opened. Our office appeared, grainy but clear enough. The familiar desk, the framed degrees, the ugly rug we'd never gotten around to replacing, and Nikolai sitting in my chair, the glow of his laptop screen washing his face in cold blue. He wasn't alone, not physically, but he wasn't alone. He was on a video call, headset on, and he was speaking fluent, rapid-fire Russian. Not rusty, not enough to get by. This was smooth, practiced, native-speed Russian, the kind you only hear from people who think and dream in the language. I work with enough global teams to recognize the cadence even if I couldn't translate every word. My blood turned to ice. I turned up the audio as high as it would go. I caught fragments. A few words I'd picked up from security briefings, acronyms, a couple of names, but I heard other words I knew too well from my world. Firewall, extraction, package, asset. His tone wasn't warm. It wasn't flirtatious. Whatever I'd expected, secret lover, whispered apologies, this was not it. It was pure business. After a long stretch of Russian, he switched to English. Slowly, purposefully, like he wanted the person on the other end to register every syllable. "She's just a useful idiot," he said, and then he laughed. I'd heard him laugh 1,000 times. At jokes, at movies, at my stupid impressions of his mother. This laugh wasn't the same. It was sharp, cruel. "Her network access is the perfect cover," he added. "She suspects nothing." I don't remember breathing. The video kept going. My vision tunneled. I watched him gesture, watched that familiar hand, my husband's hand, sketch diagrams in the air, watched the corners of his mouth tighten when he said delivery window. At some point, my fingers found the record button on the app. I saved the clip, then I saved another and another. I sat there at my corporate desk while my entire marriage reconfigured itself in my mind. This wasn't an affair. This was something else, something with acronyms and federal codes and headlines attached. I wasn't just a wife whose husband had grown distant. I was a useful idiot. I left work early that day. I lied, said I had a migraine. I drove home on autopilot, every traffic light a blur. When I pulled into the driveway, I parked and just sat. For almost an hour. I watched the office window from the car, half expecting to see Nick's face appear in the glass, watching me, watching him. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them between my knees. Inside, Shep greeted me with a soft whine and a wag, pressing his head into my stomach. He'd never fully warmed to Nikolai. Lately, he'd growled when Nick walked into a room, low and quiet. I used to shush him, embarrassed. Now I buried my face in his fur and whispered, "You knew before I did, didn't you, buddy?" For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange split-screen reality. By day, I was Caroline Holt the professional. I went to work. I answered emails. I joined video calls and nodded at slide decks and approved patches. I made dinner. I did laundry. By night, I was Caroline Holt the evidence tech. Evidence tech. I downloaded every nanny cam recording. 3 different drives, all encrypted, hidden in 3 different places. 1 in a box in the garage, 1 inside a bag of frozen peas in the back of the freezer, 1 slipped into the lining of an old handbag in my closet. I backed up his calls, his screenshots, his casual little admissions. I listened to words that made my skin crawl. I watched his face shift from husband to stranger. I was terrified. Who do you even call? The local police? Some anonymous tip line? My company's security team? The idea of walking into HR and saying, "Hey, my husband might be using my network access as cover for foreign economic espionage," felt like something from a bad thriller. I did nothing. I froze. And then, like he'd sensed my hesitation, Nikolai made the decision for me. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Not from him, from a Mr. Slade at a high-powered downtown law firm. Subject line, Holt v. Petrov, dissolution of marriage. Ms. Holt, please be advised that I represent your husband, Nikolai Petrov. He has filed for a dissolution of your marriage. He will be vacating the marital home today. From this moment forward, all communication is to be directed exclusively through my office. Any attempt to contact him directly will be considered harassment. I read it twice. I walked into our bedroom. His side of the closet was empty, not thinned out, not, I took a few things while you were at work. Gone. Drawers bare, shelves cleared. His cologne, his cufflinks, his absurdly expensive shoes. He hadn't even said goodbye. The relief was so sharp I almost threw up. Because it was over. Because he'd given me an exit. Because the man who called me a useful idiot thought he could just walk out of the house he'd been using as cover, cash out, and move on. The first meeting at Slade's office was all glass and chrome and quiet carpet. The kind of place where you never see the printers, only the art. Nikolai was there, sitting beside his lawyer, looking like a grieving widower, instead of the man who'd just abandoned his wife via email. Pale, tragic, impeccably dressed, in charcoal and mourning. Slade was every inch the shark. Perfect suit, perfect tie, perfect practice concern. My client is, of course, devastated, Slade began, glancing down at a file. But we are prepared to make this quick and clean, given the emotional duress you have put her under. I blinked. Emotional duress? Nikolai's voice shook on cue. Caroline, I can't live like this. Your paranoia, your coldness. I've been so unhappy. It was like watching a play where I'd been miscast as the villain. Slade raised a hand, the benevolent conductor. Which is why we are demanding the marital home. My client needs stability. We will also be taking full possession of your 401k, as it was accrued during the marriage, and he corrected himself neatly, he requires a fair distribution. Additionally, we are demanding sole custody of the dog. They wanted Shep. They wanted my house, my retirement, and my dog. And naturally, Slade continued, significant alimony. We will be invalidating the prenup. It was clearly signed under coercion. My client was not in a sound state of mind. He drafted the prenup, I said, my voice flat. His firm, at his request. A detail we will contest, Slade replied, dismissing my words with a flick of his fingers. So, the house, the 401k, the dog, and $15,000 a month. We're willing to accept those terms today. I looked at Nikolai. He didn't look at me. This wasn't a divorce. This was an extraction. They weren't just leaving. They were trying to liquidate me. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my ribs on the way in. I looked at Slade. Okay, I said. His smile was immediate and blinding. Good. I'm glad you're seeing reason. I'll have the papers drawn up. Okay, I repeated, standing up. My lawyer will be in touch. Slade's smile faltered. Your lawyer? I thought we were agreeing. You made your offer. I heard it, I said calmly. I said okay, as in, I understand what you just said. Now my lawyer will handle it. I walked out. For the first time since this began, Nikolai's mask slipped. Just for a second. Panic flashed across his face, fast as lightning. I got into my car in the underground garage and made 2 calls with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The first was to a woman my firm keeps on retainer for complex situations. A former federal prosecutor named Diana Vez. Diana, I said when she picked up, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. I have a situation. It's not a normal divorce. It's way, way above my pay grade. I need you to handle the divorce part while I handle the other part. The second call I made was to the FBI. The FBI didn't exactly rush. Hollywood teaches you that you call some important number, whisper, I think my spouse is a spy, and black SUVs appear within the hour. Real life is slower, quieter, and somehow more terrifying. 2 days after my call, 2 agents showed up at my house on a gray Thursday afternoon. No SUVs, no tactical vests. Just a beige sedan and 2 people who looked like they should be grading midterms. Agent Harris was the woman, early 40s, steady eyes, hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun. Agent Miller was the man, mid-50s, rumpled suit, the energy of someone who'd seen every bad decision humans could make and was deeply unimpressed. They sat on my couch while Shep watched them from the doorway, ears pricked, body tense. He didn't growl, but he didn't wag either. He was in that space between. Ms. Holt, Harris said, her voice calm, almost gentle. Why don't you show us what you have? So I did. Hands trembling, I pulled out the first drive from its hiding place behind a row of cookbooks. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the folder named something stupid like Tax Docs 2017. On the screen, thumbnails of recordings from the nanny cam, dates, times, my office. I clicked the one that had branded itself into my brain, the first time I'd heard him call me a useful idiot. I turned the laptop so they could both see. For an hour, my living room was filled with the sound of Nikolai's voice. Russian, English, the soft whir of my office fan in the background, the occasional creak of the chair I used every day. Words like firewall and asset and delivery schedule delivered in that same detached tone. Their faces did not change. They didn't gasp. They didn't exchange a dramatic look. They just watched. Harris leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, eyes on the screen. Miller took notes in a small black notebook. When the video ended, the room felt too quiet. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out in a shaky rush. I have more, I said. Other days, other calls. Copies? Miller asked. 3, I replied, all encrypted, all in different places. His eyes flicked up for the first time with something like approval. Good. They took the drives. They asked if there were any other devices. I led them down the hall to the office, my stomach clenching as I stepped into the room where all of this had started for me. Nikolai's consulting laptop still sat on the desk. He'd left it behind, wiped clean, according to him. Reset to factory settings. Nothing to see here. Harris picked it up with gloved hands, passed it to Miller. They took my office desktop too, the one I barely used. They took my router, my modem, anything that had blinked near our network. Then they sat me back down on the couch and asked me 1,000 questions. How long had we been married? How long had he been working as a consultant? Could I name any of his clients? Did I ever hear specific words? Names? Locations? Had he ever asked me for passwords? Work access? Internal documents? No. He didn't need to, I said finally, exhaustion clinging to my bones. He had my logins, my laptop, my VPN. I thought we were just one of those couples who didn't make a big deal about sharing devices. Harris nodded, expression unreadable. And the prenup, who initiated it? He did, I said. His lawyer drafted it. It was supposed to protect his family assets. And now he's filed for divorce and is attempting to invalidate the document his own counsel created, Miller added, flipping through his notes. Interesting. That's one word for it, I muttered. They asked to see the email from Slade, the terms he'd demanded. I pulled it up on my phone, handed it over. House, 401k, dog, and ongoing support, Harris read aloud. Aggressive. It's not a divorce, I said, something bitter and hollow rising in my chest. It's liquidation. I'm just inventory. The silence that followed was heavier than anything either of them could have said. Finally, Miller closed his notebook. Ms. Holt, he said slowly, I'm going to be candid with you. This is significant. It may connect to some things we're already looking at. My heart stuttered. So you believe me? He lifted an eyebrow. We just watched your husband call you a useful idiot in fluent Russian while discussing asset extraction. Yes, we believe you. Relief punched through me so hard my eyes burned. However, Harris added, and there it was, the other shoe, we're going to need one thing from you. Anything, I said, too quickly. I'll testify. I'll wear a wire. We don't need you to wear a wire, she cut in. We need you to proceed with the divorce. I stared at her. Excuse me? We need you to act like a normal, angry, petty ex-wife, Miller said, not unkindly. You've discovered he's leaving you, trying to take your house and your money and your dog. You're furious. You hire a bulldog attorney. You fight back. You want me to be bait, I said, the word tasting wrong in my mouth. We want you to be a good citizen, Harris corrected, though her eyes softened at the edges. Right now, he thinks this is a civil matter he controls. We need him to keep thinking that. We need his attention on you and the family court, not on what might be happening behind the scenes. And my lawyer? I asked. Diana? You'll need to read her in, Harris said. This is now a federal investigation. Everything in your divorce is secondary to that. The word landed like a gavel. Secondary. My house, my savings, my dog, my sanity. All secondary. After they left, the quiet in the house felt different. Before, it had been the quiet of not knowing. Now, it was the quiet of waiting. I called Diana. She came over that evening, a small woman in sensible shoes, and a blazer that had seen 1,000 courtrooms. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, jaw tightening at certain points, eyes flashing cold at others. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. Well, she said, that explains why they're trying to gut you while smiling. You believe me, I said, even though I already knew the answer. I believed you when you told me he walked out of a decade-long marriage by email, she said dryly. The espionage is just seasoning. She met with Harris and Miller the next day. Afterward, she called me. We're in, she said. From now on, anything we file, say, or do in this divorce goes through a national security filter. It's going to be messy, Caroline, and unfair. And you're going to want to scream. You can't. Not yet. I already want to scream, I said. Then scream in my office, she replied. Not in court. The entitlement escalation started almost immediately. Slade filed an emergency motion for temporary support, claiming I had cut off his delicate, vulnerable client. The filing was a work of creative fiction. According to the documents, Nikolai was a financially dependent spouse who had sacrificed his earning potential for our marriage. I was mentally unstable, emotionally abusive, and controlling. I allegedly monitored his movements, restricted his access to funds, and weaponized my higher income. There was even a therapist's note attached. I'd never seen it before in my life. It claimed I suffered from severe paranoia and delusional thinking, particularly around imagined espionage scenarios involving Nikolai. She's trying to poison the well, Diana said, flipping through the pages in my kitchen. If you come forward with the recordings, she wants it on record that you're a nutcase who thinks her husband is a spy. He is a spy, I said, exasperated. I know that, she replied. You know that. And the FBI knows that. Family court doesn't. Not yet. For now, we play our role. The dirty tricks phase followed, right on schedule. One morning the next week, I was in the kitchen making coffee when Shep suddenly erupted, full body bark, the kind of sound that tells you something is wrong before you even know what. A second later, I heard it, metal grinding on metal. Drilling. I walked slowly to the front door, heart hammering against my ribs. Shep threw himself at the wood, claws scrabbling, teeth bared. Nikolai, you can't be here, I called through the door. All communication goes through our lawyers. Caroline, open the door. His voice was muffled but frantic. I need my things. You can't just lock me out. I'll call the police. Go ahead, I said, voice shaking but steady enough. I'll wait. He did. 2 local cops showed up 10 minutes later. I opened the door a crack, enough for them to see my face and the chain, not enough for Nikolai or the locksmith hovering behind him to push their way in. Officer, thank God, Nikolai said immediately, stepping into view. His eyes were glossy, with on-demand tears. My wife, my ex, she's locked me out of my own home. She's not well. She's paranoid. She thinks I'm some sort of spy or something. I just need my medication and a few personal items. The older cop looked at me with that classic expression I'd seen 100 times in domestic incident case studies. You, ma'am, look like trouble. Ma'am, he said, you need to let your husband get his medication. This is a civil matter, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. Here is the email from his attorney stating he has vacated the home and that all communication must go through counsel. He is not allowed here without a court order. A court order to get his pills? The cop scoffed. Come on. I'm following the legal advice I was given, I said, sliding Diana's business card through the crack. You're welcome to call my attorney Ms. Vez. He took the card, annoyed. Look, ma'am, we don't want to come back here. Just give him what he wants. I can't, I said quietly. I'm sorry. He sighed, then turned to Nikolai. Sir, she's not letting you in. We can't force entry. It's a civil issue. You're going to need to take this up with the court. In an instant, the tears in Nikolai's eyes evaporated. He looked at me through the small opening, and for the first time since all of this began, he dropped every mask. You will regret this, Caroline, he said, voice low and venomous. You have no idea. He left with the locksmith and the officers. I slid down the door and just sat on the floor, back against the wood, one hand tangled in Shep's fur as he leaned his full weight against my side. 2 days later, the artifact arrived. That's what Diana and I call it now. Back then, it was just a text message that made my skin crawl. Caroline, I don't care about the furniture. I want the Matryoshka doll from the mantelpiece. It was my grandmother's. It's the only thing I care about. I'll trade you the dog for it. Trade me. My dog. I looked at the mantel, at the tacky hand-painted nesting doll he'd always kept in the office, the one I'd written off as sentimental clutter. I'd never met his grandmother. I'd never seen a single picture of her. I screenshotted the text and forwarded it to Agent Harris. The phone rang 3 minutes later. Don't touch it, she said, no preamble. That's the package. He's getting desperate. Package, I repeated, sinking onto the couch. Of course. The hearing on the prenup is next week, right? She asked. Yeah, I said. Validity of the prenup and his emergency support motion. Good, Harris replied. We'll be there. She hesitated just long enough for me to feel it. Just act normal, Caroline, she added. Play your part. Normal. Right. The morning of the hearing felt like walking into the aftermath of a storm that hadn't hit yet. Everything too still, too sharp. Family court. Room 304. Not a grand courtroom like in movies. No mahogany walls or echoing gavels. Just gray carpet, buzzing fluorescent lights, and a faded seal of the state mounted crookedly behind the judge's bench. I sat beside Diana, hands clasped tightly in my lap. She looked as calm as ever, tapping her pen lightly against her folder. Across from us, Nikolai and Mr. Slade sat in perfect composure, their side of the table a study in smug confidence. Nikolai looked polished, tragic even, tailored suit, faint under-eye shadows, the image of a wronged husband who'd been forced to defend his dignity in court. He didn't look at me. He looked at the judge like he'd already won. The judge, Honorable Patricia Alger, was a sharp woman in her 50s, no patience for theatrics. Her eyes were heavy-lidded, as if she'd seen every messy divorce a human heart could invent. Slade stood. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth, oiled with performance. This is a simple case of emotional and financial abuse. My client, Mr. Petrov, has been cut off from his marital assets by a vindictive, paranoid spouse who refuses to acknowledge the toll of her controlling behavior. I bit my tongue. Diana didn't even blink. Slade continued, weaving his story with perfect rhythm. She locked him out of his home. She's withholding his personal belongings, including necessary medication. She's enforcing a prenup that was frankly predatory. My client was not in a clear state of mind when he signed it. The judge glanced down at her notes, unimpressed. Counsel, she said, my understanding is that your firm drafted this prenup on behalf of your client. Slade didn't even flinch. A detail that only reinforces his mental duress, Your Honor. He was under immense pressure to appease his then-fiancée, who, through her considerable financial influence, dictated the terms. I felt Diana's quiet breath beside me, a subtle cue. Don't react. Slade smiled, the kind of smile men use when they believe they've cornered you. And, if I may, Your Honor, there is an added layer of concern. My client's estranged wife has developed a fixation, delusional in nature, on the idea that Mr. Petrov is involved in espionage. He actually chuckled. Yes, espionage. She claims he's a spy. She's filed no police report, produced no credible evidence, only her paranoia. The word paranoia landed like a slap. I saw the judge's brow crease. For a moment, I could feel her beginning to side with him, just a little. Diana rose slowly. No theatrics, no raised voice, just calm, precise authority. Your Honor, she said, we agree. The court doesn't have time for games, which is why my client is perfectly willing to abide by the terms of the prenup. Slade blinked. Excuse me? You heard me, Diana said, folding her hands neatly on the table. We have no intention of contesting it. Mrs. Holt will not seek alimony, assets, or additional support. However, she paused, letting the silence stretch. We are filing a counter-motion to annul the marriage on the grounds of fraud. The room shifted, even the air changed. The judge's pen stopped mid-scratch. Fraud? Yes, Your Honor, Diana said. Specifically, fraud in the inducement of marriage. We believe the union between my client, Mrs. Holt, and Mr. Petrov was not formed in good faith, but rather as a component of a deliberate financial and criminal scheme. The prenup, coincidentally drafted by Mr. Petrov's own counsel, was designed to protect certain family assets whose origins merit closer examination. Nikolai's composure cracked for half a second. Just half a second, but I saw it. The tightening around his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. Slade sputtered. This is slander. They have no proof. It's a desperate tactic to avoid paying what she owes. Diana didn't raise her voice. She just smiled slightly. Actually, Your Honor, we do have proof. Every head turned toward her. My client, she continued, is, as you can imagine, exceptionally detail-oriented. She maintains extensive documentation, including video and audio recordings, from her home office. In these recordings, Mr. Petrov is seen and heard discussing what he terms asset extraction, firewall breaches, and referring to my client as, quote, a useful idiot. The words hung there. Even the court clerk looked up. Slade slammed his palm against the table. Objection! Those are illegal recordings. Inadmissible. This is character assassination. They're admissible in civil fraud cases, counsel, the judge snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. She leaned forward, interest replacing irritation. Ms. Vez, are you prepared to show this court these materials? Yes, Your Honor, Diana replied. I have copies ready to submit. And that was when Nikolai ran. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just moved. 1 second he was sitting beside Slade, perfectly still. The next, he was up, his chair clattering to the floor behind him as he bolted toward the door. A gasp rippled through the room. Diana didn't even flinch. And that, she said calmly, would be our proof of consciousness of guilt. The door slammed open, and there they were. Agent Harris, Agent Miller, 2 U.S. Marshals behind them. They'd been waiting. Nikolai froze mid-step, one hand on the doorframe. His expression wasn't shock. It wasn't fear. It was something colder, irritation, like a man whose flight had been canceled. Mr. Nikolai Petrov, Agent Harris said, badge in hand, voice cutting through the silence. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit economic espionage and violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Gasps, murmurs. The clerk's pen fell to the floor. Slade stumbled to his feet. This is absurd. This is some kind of stunt. But Harris was already reading Nikolai his rights. One of the marshals stepped forward, took his wrists, and cuffed him cleanly. The click of metal echoed in the tiny courtroom. Nikolai didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just turned his head slightly, eyes locking on mine. They were flat, empty. There was no trace of the man I'd lived with, the man who'd made pancakes on Sundays and kissed my shoulder in the mornings. Just a stranger in a tailored suit, caught in a game I'd never known existed. He didn't look betrayed. He looked inconvenienced. Agent Miller nodded toward Diana. We'll need to coordinate with your office regarding chain of custody for the recordings. Of course, she said smoothly, passing him a flash drive. The judge, for once, looked completely stunned. Her gavel hovered midair before she finally found her voice. Well, she said slowly, I believe we have our answer regarding the fraud claim. Diana handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff. Additionally, Your Honor, this is a motion from the U.S. Attorney's Office to seal these proceedings indefinitely pending a national security investigation. Judge Alge nodded, dazed but professional. Motion granted. Court is adjourned. She looked at me, softer now. Mrs. Holt, you have a very good lawyer and a very good dog. I stood, numb. I didn't trust my legs. I barely registered the marshals leading Nikolai away. Slade shouting something incoherent, the sound of cameras snapping outside the hallway. All I could think of was the dull weight of the Matryoshka doll still sitting on my mantel, the one thing I hadn't touched. Diana touched my arm. You okay? No, I said honestly, but I will be. She gave a small nod. That's all you need to be right now. As we walked toward the elevators, Shep trotting at my side, Slade's voice echoed from the hallway. You don't know what you've done. Diana didn't even glance back. She pressed the elevator button and said dryly, That's one way to handle an alimony claim. Part 4. It's been 8 months since that day in court. When I think about it now, it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like waking up after a car crash and realizing you're alive but don't remember how. The FBI called it relocation for precautionary reasons. I called it starting over. New town. New job assignment from my firm. New locks on every door. The house is smaller now. Just 2 bedrooms and a view of the woods instead of the city skyline. But it's quiet. And quiet, after everything, feels like a luxury. Shep's here too. He's 12 now. His muzzle has gone gray and his hips ache when it rains. He spends most of his days napping by the window, occasionally glancing at the shadows like he's still on duty. Sometimes I wonder if he misses Nikolai. Then I remember the way he used to growl when Nikolai entered a room and I realize, no, he was the only one who ever saw clearly. The government handled everything. The annulment was approved. The court determined the marriage was entered under fraudulent pretenses. Every financial tie was severed. The prenup stood, ironically enough, but in the end, it didn't matter. The house I'd built, the one Nikolai had wanted to claim, I kept, though I'll never live there again. It feels too haunted by the echo of his lies. I'm selling it next month. Maybe someone else can fill it with new stories. Diana told me later what the FBI pieced together. Nikolai wasn't a James Bond type of spy. No guns, no tuxedos, no cinematic escapes. He was a corporate operative, part of a network that targeted mid-level tech professionals like me, people with access, people trusted to handle internal systems but not high enough to raise suspicion. He worked through shell companies, consulting firms with polished websites and fake clients. He'd done it before, twice in fact, both times ending in sudden divorces, sealed settlements, and unexplained bank transfers overseas. His family assets weren't generational wealth. They were payouts, bonuses for every gig, every infiltration. The package inside the Matryoshka doll turned out to be a ledger, handwritten, meticulous, with names, account numbers, and instructions coded in Russian shorthand. The doll wasn't sentimental, it was a drop point. When they showed it to me in the evidence room, sealed in plastic, I remember thinking how absurdly ordinary it looked. Just a cheap nesting doll with chipped paint, something you'd find at a flea market. It was the only thing that ever truly belonged to him. The FBI told me he'd taken a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison for economic espionage, conspiracy, and violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. He could have faced 30, but he gave them names, contacts, offshore accounts, the usual trade-off. Slade, his lawyer, wasn't so lucky. He got disbarred. Turns out he'd known more than he admitted, about the shell companies, about where the family assets came from. He's facing his own charges now. Sometimes I still get calls from the Bureau, follow-ups, requests for context. Every time I hear Agent Harris on the line, I feel the same odd mix of gratitude and exhaustion. Once, she said, almost kindly, "You helped stop something much bigger than him, Caroline." But it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like survival. When someone asks me what it's like, finding out the person you loved was using your marriage as cover for espionage, I never know how to answer. It's not the betrayal itself that breaks you. It's the scale of the lie. Every I love you, every morning coffee, every lazy Sunday walk. Each one becomes evidence in a case file. I'm in therapy now. My therapist says trauma is stored in the body, not the memory. That my muscles flinch at sounds because they learned fear faster than my brain could process it. She also says I don't have trust issues. I have a trust firewall. It makes her laugh when I phrase it that way, but she gets it. I don't date. I don't even try. The idea of intimacy feels fragile, like a system that's already crashed once and hasn't been rebooted. Sometimes I go for long drives just to feel motion again. The hum of the road beneath the tires reminds me I'm still here, still moving forward, even if it's slow. I think about Nikolai sometimes, not as the husband I lost, but as the stranger he always was. The man who could look me in the eyes and say, "I love you," while mapping the vulnerabilities in my company's network. He wasn't brilliant, he was arrogant. And that's what saved me. He got sloppy, overconfident. He believed I was harmless, just a woman with a nice house and a soft heart. He thought he could walk away with everything because I'd never see it coming. He was wrong. The justice system doesn't make you whole. It just quiets the noise. At night, when the house is dark and Shep is asleep beside me, I sometimes dream of the life I thought I had, the version where love wasn't a mission and marriage wasn't a front. But then I wake up, I make coffee, I feed the dog, I check the locks, and I tell myself the truth. I didn't win anything, I just got out alive. Shep shifts in his sleep, paws twitching like he's chasing something in his dreams. I reach down and rest my hand on his back. "You're the only one who was real, weren't you, buddy?" I whisper. His tail thumps twice. And for the first time in a long time, I let the silence sit. Because maybe survival isn't the opposite of loss. Maybe it's just what comes after.